Atum reconstructed, sometimes rendered as Atum or Tem, is the primordial god in Egyptian mythology from whom all else arose. Atum is usually depicted in anthropomorphic form, wearing either the royal headcloth or the dual white and red crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, reinforcing his connection with kingship. He is typically depicted sitting on a throne and will usually be represented with the head of a ram when he is mentioned within the context of his connection to the underworld and his solar attributes. He created himself and is the father of Shu and Tefnut, the divine couple who are the ancestors of the other Egyptian deities. Atum is also closely associated with the evening sun. As a primordial god and as the evening sun, Atum has chthonic and underworld connections. Atum was relevant to the ancient Egyptians throughout most of Egypt's history. He is believed to have been present in ideology as early as pre-dynastic times, becoming even more prevalent during the Old Kingdom and continuing to be worshipped through the Middle and New Kingdom. Though he becomes overshadowed by around this time, Atum is one of the most important and frequently mentioned deities from earliest times, as evidenced by his prominence in the pyramid texts, where he is portrayed as both a creator and father to the king throughout the collection of spells. Several writings contradict how Atum was brought into existence. According to the Heliopolitan view, Atum originally existed in his egg within the primeval waters, being born during the primeval waters flood, becoming the source of everything that was created after him. The Memphites, priests of Memphis, on the other hand, believed that Ptah created Atum in a more intellectual way, using his speech and thought, as told on the Shabaka stone. In the Heliopolitan creation myth, Atum was considered to be the first god, having created himself, sitting on a mound, Benben, or identified with the mound itself, from the primordial waters, Nu. Early myths state that Atum created the god Shu and goddess Tefnut by spitting them out of his mouth. One text debates that Atum did not create Shu and Tefnut by spitting them out of his mouth by means of saliva and semen, but rather by Atum's lips. Another writing describes Shu and Tefnut being birthed by Atum's hand. That same writing states that Atum's hand is the title of the god's wife based on her Heliopolitan beginning. Other myths state Atum created by masturbation, with the hand he used in this act that may be interpreted as the female principle inherent within him and identified with goddesses such as Hathor or Eusoaset. Yet other interpretations state that he has made union with his shadow. In the Old Kingdom, the Egyptians believed that Atum lifted the dead king's soul from his pyramid to the starry heavens. He was also a solar deity, associated with the primary sun god Ra. Atum was linked specifically with the evening sun, while Ra, or the closely linked god Khepri, were connected with the sun at morning and midday. In the coffin texts, Atum has a vital conversation with Osiris in which he describes the end of the universe as a time in which everything will cease to exist, with the exception of the elements of the primordial waters, stating that after millions of years, he and Osiris would be the only ones to survive the end of time as serpents. He claims that he will destroy everything he created in the beginning of existence and bring it back to Nu, the primeval waters, thus describing the belief that the gods and goddesses would one day cease to exist outside of the primeval waters. In the Book of the Dead, which was still current in the Greco-Roman period, the sun god Atum is said to have ascended from chaos, waters with the appearance of a snake, the animal renewing itself every morning. Atum is the god of pre-existence and post-existence. In the binary solar cycle, the serpentine Atum is contrasted with the scarab-headed god Khepri, the young sun god whose name is derived from the Egyptian Afshar to come into existence. Khepri, Atum encompassed sunrise and sunset, thus reflecting the entire cycle of morning and evening. Atum was a self-created deity, the first being to emerge from the darkness and endless watery abyss that existed before creation. A product of the energy and matter contained in this chaos, he created his children, the first deities, out of loneliness. He produced from his own sneeze, or in some accounts, semen, Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. The brother and sister, curious about the primeval waters that surrounded them, went to explore the waters and disappeared into the darkness. Unable to bear his loss, Atum sent a fiery messenger, the Eye of Ra, to find his children. The tears of joy he shed upon their return were the first human beings. Babi, also Baba, in ancient Egyptian religion, was the deification of the hamadryas baboon, one of the animals present in ancient Egypt. His name is usually translated as Bull of the Baboons, roughly meaning chief of the baboons. Since baboons were considered to be the dead, Babi was viewed as a deity of the underworld, the Duat. Baboons are extremely aggressive and omnivorous, and Babi was viewed as being very bloodthirsty and living on entrails. Consequently, he was viewed as devouring the souls of the sinful after they had been weighed against Mahat, the concept of truth order, and was thus said to stand by a lake of fire, representing destruction. Since this judging of righteousness was an important part of the underworld, Babi was said to be the first-born son of Osiris, the god of the dead, in the same regions in which people believed in Babi. Baboons also have noticeably high libidos, in addition to their high level of genital marking, and so Babi was considered the god of virility of the dead. He was usually portrayed with an erection, and due to the association with the judging of souls, was sometimes depicted as using it as the mast of the ferry, which conveyed the righteous to Aaru, a series of islands. One spell in a funerary text identifies the deceased person's phallus with Babi, ensuring that the deceased will be able to have sexual intercourse in the afterlife. Banebdjedet was an ancient Egyptian ram god with a cult center at Mendes. Hnum was the equivalent god in Upper Egypt. This wife was the goddess Hadmehit for most of the fishes, who was perhaps the original deity of Mendes. Their offspring was Horus the child, and they formed the so-called Mendesian triad. Typically, the horned god Bennu was depicted with 4 rams' heads to represent the 4 base of the sun god. He may also be linked to the first 4 gods to rule over Egypt: Osiris, Geb, Shu, and Ra, Atum, with large granite shrines to each in the Mendes sanctuary. The Book of the Heavenly Cow describes the ram of Mendes as being the bay of Osiris, but this was not an exclusive association. A story dated to the New Kingdom describes him as being consulted by the divine tribunal to judge between Horus and Seth, but he proposes that Neith do it instead as an act of diplomacy. As the dispute continues, it is Benebdjedet who suggests that Seth be given the throne as he is the elder brother. In a chapel in the Ramesseum, a stela records how the god Ptah took the form of Banebdjedet in view of gaining his virility. In order to have union with the woman who would conceive Ramesses, i.e. Bastet was worshipped in Bubastes in Lower Egypt, originally as a lioness goddess, a role shared by other deities such as Sekhmet. Eventually, Bastet and Sekhmet were characterized as 2 aspects of the same goddess, with Sekhmet representing the powerful warrior and protector aspect, and Bastet, who increasingly was depicted as a cat, representing a gentler aspect. Bastet first appears in the 3rd millennium BEs, where she's depicted as either a fierce lioness or a woman with the head of a lioness. 2,000 years later, during the 3rd intermediate period of Egypt Huay Egypt c. 1070–712 BCE, Bastet began to be depicted as a domestic cat or a cat-headed woman. Cats in ancient Egypt were highly revered, partly due to their ability to combat vermin such as mice, rats, which threatened key food supplies, and snakes, especially cobras. Cats of royalty were, in some instances, known to be dressed in golden jewelry and were allowed to eat from the plates of their owners. Estimate that during the 22nd dynasty, 945–15 BC, Bastet worship changed from being a lioness deity into being predominantly a major cat deity. Because domestic cats tend to be tender and protective of their offspring, Bastet was also regarded as a good mother and sometimes was depicted with numerous kittens. Herodotus, an ancient Greek historian who traveled in Egypt in the 5th century BC, describes Bastet's temple at some length. Save for the entrance, it stands on an island. 2 separate channels approach it from the Nile, and after coming up to the entry of the temple, they run around it on opposite sides, each of them 100 feet wide and overshadowed by trees. The temple is in the midst of the city, the whole circuit of which commands a view down into it. For the city's level has been raised, but that of the temple has been left as it was from the first, so that it can be seen into from without. A stone wall, carven with figures, runs around it. Within is a grove of very tall trees growing round a great shrine, wherein is the image of the goddess. The temple is a square, each side measuring a furlong. A road paved with stone of about 3 furlongs length leads to the entrance, running eastward through the marketplace, towards the temple of Hermes. This road is about 400 feet wide and bordered by trees reaching to heaven. This description by Herodotus and several Egyptian texts suggests that water surrounded the temple on 3 out of 4 sides, forming a type of lake known as Ishiru, not too dissimilar from that surrounding the temple of the mother goddess Mut in Karnak at Thebes. These lakes were typical components of temples devoted to a number of lioness goddesses, who are said to represent one original goddess, Bastet, Mut, Tefnut, Hathor, and Sekhmet, Athor and Sekhmet, and came to be associated with sun gods such as Horus and Re of Rel as the Eye of Re. Each of them had to be appeased by a specific set of rituals. One myth relates that a lioness, fiery and wrathful, was once cooled down by the water of the lake, transformed into a gentle cat, and settled in the temple. At the Bubastes temple, some cats were found to have been mummified and buried, many next to their owners. More than 300,000 mummified cats were discovered when Bastet's temple was excavated. The death of a cat might leave a family in great mourning, and those who could would have them embalmed or buried in cat cemeteries, pointing to the great prevalence of the cult of Bastet. Extensive burials of cat remains were found not only at Bubastes, but also at Beni Hassan and Saqqara. In 1888, a farmer uncovered a burial site of many hundreds of thousands of cats in Beni Hassan. Herodotus also relates that of the many solemn festivals held in Egypt, the most important and most popular one was that celebrated in Bubastes in honor of this goddess. Each year on the day of her festival, the town was said to have attracted some 700,000 visitors, both men and women, but not children, who arrived in numerous crowded ships. The women engaged in music, song, and dance on their way to the place. Great sacrifices were made and prodigious amounts of wine were drunk, more than was the case throughout the year. This accords well with Egyptian sources that prescribe that lioness goddesses are to be appeased with the feasts of drunkenness. A festival of Bastet was known to be celebrated during the New Kingdom at Bubastes. The block statue from the 18th dynasty, 1380 BC, of Neferke, a Wab priest of Sekhmet, provides written evidence for this. The inscription suggests that the king, Amenhotep II, was present at the event and had great offerings made to the deity. Bait is a cow goddess in Egyptian mythology who was depicted as a human face with cow ears and horns, or as a woman. Evidence of the worship of Bat exists from the earliest records of the religious practices in ancient Egypt. By the time of the Middle Kingdom, after the unification of Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, her identity and attributes were subsumed within that of the goddess Hathor, a similar goddess worshipped in another nome. The imagery of Bat persisted throughout the history of ancient Egypt on the sistrum, a sacred instrument that remained associated with religious practices. The worship of Bat dates to earliest times in ancient Egypt and may have its origins in late Paleolithic cattle-herding cultures. Bait was the chief goddess of Seshesh, otherwise known as Hu or Diospolis Pava, the seventh nome of Upper Egypt. The epithet bat may be linked to the word bay with the feminine suffix tat. A person's bay roughly equates to one's personality or emanation and often is translated as soul. Although it was rare for bay to be clearly depicted in painting or sculpture, some notable artifacts, such as the upper portions of the Narmer palette, include depictions of the goddess in bovine form. In other instances, she was pictured as a celestial bovine creature surrounded by stars, or as a woman. More commonly, bait was depicted on amulets with a human face, but with bovine features such as the ears of a cow and the inward curving horns of the type of cattle first herded by the Egyptians. Bat became strongly associated with the sistrum, and the center of her cult was known as the Mansion of the Sistrum. The sistrum is an ankh-shaped musical instrument, which was one of the most frequently used sacred instruments in ancient Egyptian temples. Some instruments would include depictions of Bat, with her head and neck as the handle and base, and with its rattles placed between her horns. The imagery is repeated on each side of the instrument, having two faces, as mentioned in the pyramid texts. I am praise. I am majesty. I am Bat with her two faces. I am the one who is saved, and I have saved myself from all things evil. Bennu is an ancient Egyptian deity linked with the sun, creation, and rebirth. He may have been the original inspiration for the phoenix legends that developed in Greek mythology. According to Egyptian mythology, Bennu was a self-created being said to have played a role in the creation of the world. He was said to be the Biyah of Ra and to have enabled the creative actions of Atum. The deity was said to have flown over the waters of Nun that existed before creation, landing on a rock and issuing a call that determined the nature of creation. He also was a symbol of rebirth and, therefore, was associated with Osiris. Some of the titles of Bennu were He Who Came into Being by Himself and Lord of Jubilees. The latter epithet referred to the belief that Bennu periodically renewed himself, like the sun was thought to do. His name is related to the Egyptian verb yuwin, meaning to rise in brilliance or to shine. New Kingdom artwork shows Bennu as a huge gray heron with a long beak and a two-feathered crest. Sometimes Bennu is depicted as perched on a ben stone, representing Re and the name of the top stone of a pyramid, or in a willow tree, representing Osiris. Because of the connection with Osiris, Bennu sometimes wears the Atef crown instead of the solar disk. In comparatively recent times, a large species of heron, now extinct, lived on the Arabian Peninsula. It shares many characteristics with Bennu. It may have been the animal after which Bennu was modeled by the ancient Egyptians during the New Kingdom. Like Atum and Ra, the Bennu was probably worshipped in their cult center at Heliopolis. The deity also appears on funerary scarab amulets as a symbol of rebirth. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing about Egyptian customs and traditions in the 5th century BC, wrote that the people at Heliopolis described the phoenix to him. They said it lived for 500 years before dying, resuscitating, building a funerary egg with myrrh for the paternal corpse, and carrying it to the Temple of the Sun at Heliopolis. His description of the phoenix likens it to an eagle with red and gold plumage, reminiscent of the sun. The name phoenix could be derived from Bennu, and its rebirth and connections with the sun resemble the beliefs about Bennu. However, Egyptian sources do not mention a death of the deity. Bes, together with his feminine counterpart Bestet, is an ancient Egyptian deity worshipped as a protector of households and, in particular, of mothers, children, and childbirth. Bes later came to be regarded as the defender of everything good and the enemy of all that is bad. Bes was a household protector, becoming responsible throughout ancient Egyptian history for such very tasks as killing snakes, fighting off evil spirits, watching after children, and aiding women in labor by fighting off evil spirits, and thus present with Taward at births. Images of the deity, quite different from those of the other gods, were kept in homes. Normally, Egyptian gods were shown in profile, but instead Bes appeared in full-face portrait ithyphallic and sometimes in a soldier's tunic, so as to appear ready to launch an attack on any approaching evil. He scared away demons from houses, so his statue was put up as a protector. Since he drove off evil, Bes also came to symbolize the good things in life: music, dance, and sexual pleasure. In the New Kingdom, tattoos of Bes could be found on the thighs of dancers, musicians, and servant girls. Many instances of BS masks and costumes from the New Kingdom and later have been uncovered. These show considerable wear thought to be too great for occasional use at festivals and are therefore thought to have been used by professional performers or given out for rent. Later, in the Ptolemaic period of Egyptian history, chambers were constructed painted with images of Bes and his wife Bastet, thought by Egyptologists to have been for the purpose of curing fertility problems or general healing rituals. The Cavern deities of the underworld were ancient Egyptian minor deities charged with punishing the damned souls by beheading and devouring them. The Egyptians believed that in the underworld, the Duat, there were at least 12 caves and caverns inhabited by terrible deities and supernatural creatures that would feed on the souls of the wicked. Several funerary papyri, in addition to the wall decorations of some tombs in the Valley of the Kings and the southern hall of the Osirion at Abydos, list these deities involved in the extermination, usually by beheading, of the enemies of the sun, Goddard, and of his daughter Moet, goddess of truth and justice. In particular, these creatures are systematically listed in the spell of the 12 caves known from a papyrus, Cairo 24,742, dating back to the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep II, 1427-1401 BC of the 18th dynasty. The first 7 caverns contained groups of 3 mummiform and 3 anthropomorphic deities, 2 male and 1 female in each triad. From the 8th to the 20th cavern, one would find divinities in variable numbers. In the 8th, for example, there were 7 groups along with individual divinities, and at least 20 of them in the 9th it is normal to find, next to the lists of names and positions of these other gods. Beneath their representations, columns of offers prescribed for them too, along with the beneficent deeds that the dead would achieve. Once pacified, in fact, these deities could facilitate the free movement in the hereafter, providing nourishment and light in the darkness. The 4 sons of Horus were a group of 4 gods in ancient Egyptian religion who were essentially the personifications of the 4 canopic jars, which accompanied mummified bodies. Since the heart was thought to embody the soul, it was left inside the body. The brain was thought only to be the origin of mucus, so it was reduced to liquid, removed with metal hooks, and discarded. This left the stomach and small intestines, liver, large intestines, and lungs, which were removed, embalmed, and stored, each organ in its own jar. There were times when embalmers deviated from this scheme. During the 21st dynasty, they embalmed and wrapped the viscera and returned them to the body while the canopic jars remained empty symbols. The earliest reference to the sons of Horus, the elder, is found in the pyramid texts, where they are described as friends of the king, as they assist the king in his ascension to heaven in the eastern sky by means of ladders. Isis was often seen as the mother of the 4 sons of Horus, though in the details of the funerary ritual each son, and therefore each canopic jar, was protected by a particular goddess. Just as the sons of Horus protected the contents of a canopic jar, the king's organs, so they in turn were protected. As they were male in accordance with the principles of male-female duality, their protectors were female. Hafi, the baboon-headed son of Horus, protected the lungs of the deceased and was in turn protected by the goddess Nephthys. The spelling of his name includes a hieroglyph which is thought to be connected with steering a boat, although its exact nature is not known. For this reason, he was sometimes connected with navigation, although early references call him the Great Runner. You are the Great Runner. Come, that you may join up my father in and not be far in this, your name of Hapi, for you are the greatest of my children. So says Horus. In spell 151 of the Book of the Dead, Hapi is given the following words to say, I have come to be your protection. I have bound your head and your limbs for you. I have smitten your enemies beneath you for you and given you your head eternally. Spell 148 in the Book of the Dead directly associates all four of Horus's sons, described as the 4 pillars of Shu and one of the 4 rudders of heaven, with the 4 cardinal points of the compass. Hapi was associated with the north. Imsidi, the human-headed son of Horus, protected the liver of the deceased and was in turn protected by the goddess Isis. His role was to make sure that the dead would make it to the afterlife, as he is asked to lift them up by Horus. You have come to En. Betake yourself beneath him and lift him up. Do not be far from him. Even in your name of Imsidi, to stand up meant to be active and thus alive, while to be prone signified death. In spell 151 of the Book of the Dead, Imsidi is given the following words to say, I am your son, Osiris. I have come to be your protection. I have strengthened your house enduringly, as Piatai decreed in accordance with what Ra himself decrees. Again, the theme of making alive and revivifying is alluded to through the metaphor of making his house flourish. He does this with the authority of 2 creator gods, Pita and Ra, or Spell 148 in the Book of the Dead directly associates all 4 of Horus's sons to the 4 cardinal points. Imsidi was associated with the south. Duamutev, the jackal-headed son of Horus, protected the stomach of the deceased and was in turn protected by the goddess Neith. It seems that his role was to worship the dead person, and his name means literally he who worships his mother. In the coffin text, Horus calls upon him, Come and worship my father En for me, just as you went, that you might worship my mother Isis in your name Duamutev. Is had a dual role. Not only was she the wife of Osiris and the mother of Horus, but she was also the consort of Horus the Elder, and thus the mother of the sons of Horus. This ambiguity is added to when Duamutev calls Osiris, rather than Horus his father, although kinship terms were used very loosely, and father can be used as ancestor and son as descendant. In spell 151 of the Book of the Dead, Duamutev is given the following words to say, I have come to rescue my father Osiris from his assailant. The text does not make it clear who might assail Osiris, although there are 2 major candidates. The obvious one is Set, the murderer of Osiris. Somehow the son who worships his mother Isis is able to assist in overcoming Set. The other possibility is Apophis, the serpent demon who prevents the sun's passage and thus the resurrection of Osiris. Either way, Duamutev, through his worship of Isis, has the power to protect the deceased from harm. Duamutev was also considered one of the 4 pillars of Shu, a rudder of heaven, and was associated with the East. Kebesenuef was the falcon-headed son of Horus and protected the intestines of the deceased. He was in turn protected by the goddess Serket. It appears that his role was to refresh the dead person, and his name means literally he who libates his siblings. Horus commands him, Come refresh my father. Betake yourself to him in your name of Kebesenuef. You have come that you may make coolness for him after you. Libation or showering with cool water was a traditional form of worship in ancient Egypt. There are many images of the pharaoh presenting libation to the gods. There is a sense of a dual function of cleansing and refreshing them. After Set murdered Osiris, he cut the body into pieces and scattered them around the delta. This was anathema to the Egyptians, and the service that Kebesenuef gives to the dead is to reassemble their parts so they can be properly preserved. In spell 151 of the Book of the Dead, he is given the following words to say, I am your son, Osiris. I have come to be your protection. I have united your bones for you. I have united your bones for you, have brought you your limbs for you, have brought you your heart, and placed it for you at its place in your body. Kebesenuef was the god associated with the West.